What's up, friends? Thank you so much for tuning in to the Be Less Unfit Performance podcast YouTube show. You're going to notice over the course of these videos that I've changed a lot. I filmed these over the course of 2 years. So as my life changed, you see my body change. One. Two, I changed the way I was going to use these videos. They were going to only be an add-on to the program. Instead, I wanted everybody to be able to have this great information, and so now they're live. If you have any questions or want to know more about the Be Less Unfit program, please head over to sampogue.com or belessunfit.com to learn more and check it out. In the meantime, please enjoy this amazing show and learn more about our guests by going down to the comment section bio area and click what they have going on. I'm so blessed that they said yes to helping me out, and I want you to go learn from them as well. So enjoy the show, have a great day, and please remember to subscribe. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the BLF Performance Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Mike T. Nelson, just an amazingly educated but super friendly human that's really been able to inspire me and educate me on the landscape are physical wellness and well-being and nutrition, and breaking it down from a high science level to making sure that everybody can understand it and breaking it down into components that actually work with our lives. And I really appreciate this message from Dr. Mike because he's a lifelong educator and a lifelong student, acquiring more hours of college than probably everybody on this webinar will ever combine total in their lives. And that's why I'm so blessed to have him. Dr. Mike T. Nelson, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on here. And if I'm still sweating a little bit, I just walked in from doing a bunch of rowing, and it's in Texas, so it's actually warm today. So,
do you travel with your rower?
No, well, my wife is here looking at me. I have actually, but this time we did it because I actually do this thing where I scope out the gyms ahead of time, and I have my assistant send me pictures of what's in the gym. So this one down here, just down the way, has one. The display is really wonky, but it works. But yes, we have thrown the rower in the back. We went all the way out to Hood River last year with an axle bar, a bunch of grip stuff, and like 350 pounds of weight plus all the gear. So
I love it, but I love that you're able to live this life and be able to live the life that you want to live as well. Like,
yeah,
both
totally.
from an academic and a personal life, you guys get to go. I love watching your travels and do cool shit. Give everybody a good idea around, like, you know, where you came from, how your education got here, and where that led you into this research of metabolic flexibility and what that means.
Yeah, so I initially got into metabolic flexibility from just research. I had never heard about it. This is 13 years ago now. And I initially did a Bachelor of Arts, and then I did a master's in mechanical engineering, biomechanics, where I'd never go back to school again. I just kept doing physiology for fun because I, started college like probably a lot of males. I was 6'3" and 156 pounds. I kind of looked like a eel-shaped rake, and figured maybe I should lift weights and gain some weight. That might be a good idea. So I just thought from a physiology standpoint, I took all those classes for fun. Did about 7.5 years of that and worked for a medical device company for a while. And then decided, well, I should maybe go back to school again because I don't feel like I know enough about physiology. So did about 5 years in a PhD program in biomedical engineering and decided I didn't want to do a lot more math. So I dropped out of that. And I went over to the exercise phys program because for the longest time, that's what I really wanted to do. And that's what I spent all my free time doing and trying things out. But I never knew what I was going to do with it, because it's like, you don't need a PhD to be a trainer. And I wasn't sure I wanted to be a trainer the rest of my life. There's nothing wrong with that. Just for me, like dealing with people on a day-by-day basis was just kind of not my thing. I'd much rather go read research and try it out on a handful of humans. So when I got to the PhD program in exercise phys, my advisor is like, hey, we got 2 new projects and they both involve a lot of math. He looks around the room and he points at me. He's like, hey, you math boy, these are your projects now. And they were actually on heart rate variability and metabolic flexibility. Because most people who do, or not engineering, but most do physiology, unless you're doing like a really interesting sub niche, maybe some biomechanics, maybe some movement stuff, like you don't really take a lot of math. So most of the people there, even though they're master's, PhD, students, didn't have the math background to do it. So I was looking at what's called fine-scale variability across physiologic systems, which in English just means that, hey, we should probably not look at everything as just a nice, neat average. Maybe if we do this other form of math, there's some information there. So that's how I got into metabolic flexibility. And I was trying to find a non-invasive way to potentially measure it just using a metabolic cart. The metabolic cart, most people have seen, if you do an exercise test, you breathe into this little tube, it goes into this machine, and it tells you a whole bunch of different metrics. But one of the things it tells you for each breath, if you have a fancy machine, how much fat are you using and how much carbohydrates are you using? And so that gives us some interesting metrics of about, bioenergetics and what exercise is doing.
Perfect. This is, I really wanted Dr. Mike to come on here and talk about a lot of the intricacies that this program really engulfs. And as you guys are going to experience the program, while it is a training program and there is exercise and there is components around deadlifting and squatting, the beauty of the program is really around the habits and getting you to experience different lifestyle choices that hopefully become staples in your life. And hopefully Dr. Mike is going to be able to unveil the why behind a lot of these things, because knowledge is power. And so in the, in the program, you're going to be doing everything from going on low intensity walks to getting some quiet time and some meditation, to getting some sunshine on your face, to going to bed earlier, to trying to wake up earlier and trying to change that circadian rhythm and hopefully get you in a better rhythm overall. And all of this has a lot to do with how our body utilizes fat and carbohydrates as energy and how we function day to day as humans. And so Dr. Mike's going to give us a great talk on understanding where this all kind of fits in together.
Cool. And I have a bunch of slides if you're ready.
Absolutely.
There. All right. So for this one, what I did is, and I'll share my screen here. Let's see. Is it showing up on your side there?
It is not, but
that might be on my side too. I think I need to share my screen here.
Oh, there we go. Probably.
Let's see. Let me go share. Desktop. Yes. All right. And should be going there. Does it look all right?
Yes, it looks great.
All
it's an
right,
amazing,
cool.
Beautiful couple right there on the screen.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah, so thank you for having me do this, Em. I appreciate it. So what I did with this one is primarily focused on the topic of sleep and then tying into some of the components we talked about from the metabolism side, and then just kind of breaking down what are the specific action items that people can do. So it's a little heavy on the theory to start, and then it gets more specific as we go. And you can find some more stuff on this. This is from the Flex Diet certification that I do. If people are interested in that, we'll have more info at the end. So that's myself, that's my wife there. So thank you for having us do this. So one of the first times I got interested in sleep was, almost like probably 10-ish years ago now, I think. I don't know if there's any organic chemists watching, but you can maybe try to guess what the top molecule is. Sam's probably familiar with what the bottom molecules are
Definitely.
made of. Yeah. So the top one's actually GHB, and the bottom one, as you can guess, is tequila. So I was at, I think it was an Ancestral Health Society. Was it the first one? I think it was like the second one, actually, years ago. And so just kind of there hanging out, and I ran into a guy named Dan Party. So now Dr. Dan Party. And we started talking about sleep. And so I started asking him like all these questions, like, oh, I've never been able to figure out stuff about sleep. And so we ended up staying up till like 3:30 in the morning, talking about sleep and doing probably a few too many shots of tequila in the process. One person in our group who will remain nameless, about 2 in the morning is like, we need more tequila. So she ran around the hotel, like trying to find tequila at like 2 in the morning. And amazingly enough, she actually succeeded. So Dan used to do research on a molecule called GHB, which most people may have heard of as kind of a date rape type drug, was since pulled off the market. Old school bodybuilders used to try to use it for growth hormone release. And what's interesting about the drug is that at high doses, it definitely can be a sedative. There definitely is some negative effects with it. But at low doses, it does some very interesting things with sleep. So Dan worked for a pharmaceutical company that was trying to look at it from a pharmaceutical perspective. Maybe they could tweak the molecule, maybe they could do different things for people who have narcolepsy. So narcolepsy, as you know, is just a disease where all of a sudden you just boom. I mean, you're just out and you fall asleep. And even now, there's not a whole lot of drugs that are really good for it. But what I've always been fascinated about physiology is if we have something we think is correct, most of the time, because there's enough humans running around, that there's probably some type of disease or pathology where the thing we thought was correct, we can actually test, right? So maybe there's some interesting data we could get from people who have narcolepsy about how normal sleep patterns regulate. Just like on carbohydrates, you're like, oh, I think carbohydrates are used for high intense exercise. And I find a group of people who have very low to almost non-existent levels of carbohydrates. Even on a low carb diet, your glycogen stores will still be not too bad if your calories are sufficient. But there's a group of people who have something called McArdle's disease, where they have genetically lost the enzyme to take down glycogen. So in essence, they can't really run glycogen at all. They can only run blood glucose. And what we find with them, if you put them on high intense exercise, they suck horribly at it. So that does give us some information that carbohydrates are good for exercise. So I've always been kind of interested in what are different pathologies that we can find related to this. And I'm not a comparative biologist by any means. And I did see dolphins down here yesterday, which was super cool. So I was doing my little meditation on the ocean side, and I saw them come by. And at first I was a little afraid because I thought they were sharks, but then they kind of did the little thing where they go up and down, because I was like, oh, so much for my cold water immersion in the ocean today. I may skip that. But it turns out they were dolphins instead. And what's interesting about dolphins is they can sleep with half of their brain. So dolphins get what's called the unihemispheric slow wave sleep. Within a 24-hour period, each half of the brain gets about 4 hours of slow wave sleep. So like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Humans are not able to do this as far as we know. Because I've wondered about certain mammals where like, like sharks and dolphins, like you never see a picture of a sleeping dolphin, right? I don't know if it exists, but you just don't see one. So I'm like, oh, they're still alive. So like, what the hell's going on, right? So sometimes for comparative anatomy, the animals have some very interesting specialization that allows them to do things that humans can't. So if we look at what is just kind of our sleep 101 here, our master regulator is the SCN in the brain. And what we found is over time, there's actually multiple what they call clock genes. These are genes that will appear to regulate different aspects of time. And if you think about, I like thinking about biology in terms of it's probably very much survival based, right? Our body is exquisitely designed in order to do everything in order to survive. It would make sense that there's not just one regulator of sleep in the body, right? So having timing and different effects, it shows up in pretty much all the tissues that they've looked at so far. Now, do they have exact essence worked out of what tissues are more important or not? But it appears that the SCN, the structure in the brain, is kind of the master regulator. Everything kind of appears to flow down from it from there. We do know that sleep is essential, right? So if we go back to our survival hierarchy, things that are essential are probably going to rate a little bit higher. We know that if you don't sleep, bad stuff is going to happen to you, which we'll talk about. It's very useful for memory formation. One thing that people forget about this is also processing motor memory and different processing effects. They've done some fascinating studies on rats in maze tests. And then they've done things where they've sleep deprived the rats and they've not. And what they find is for them to memorize the path through the maze, that sleep is incredibly critical for that. And they did even some very cool studies where they put these little electrodes in the mouse or the rat's brain when they're sleeping. And what they saw was the same areas like firing of when the mouse was going through the maze. So it's almost like you're replaying that motor pattern again at a different speed. And if you think about trying to get reps, right, so you talk about deadlifts and stuff, trying to learn and exercise, right, there's part of a motor memory in order associated to do that. So we know that sleep is like super critical for that. So I even tell athletes that, hey, try to leave the gym doing the best that you could. And then don't be surprised if you come back the next day, and especially if you're learning something that's very technique orientated, that you actually might do better, even than when you left, right? Because they kind of think like, oh, I'm not really going to do better, but you can, which is pretty cool, especially if you get sleep. So sleep can generally be broken down into what's called deep or REM. So REM is a rapid eye movement. And here's the thing about REM, your body is actually completely paralyzed at that point, unless you have a disease of sleepwalking, things of that nature. Which I was just fascinated by that. It's like, okay, so you're a survival-based organism, and your body's going to prioritize sleep to the degree so much that during one phase of it, you're actually going to be completely paralyzed. And that's actually a good thing, right? Because no one would want to be acting out all their dreams and stuff like that. It's not going to be good. One other thing now with, I do have an Oura Ring, and I do like the different sleep trackers. Some of them are pretty good. I do like the Oura Ring. There's been this kind of general trend by biohackers and other people to try to get like 100% sleep efficiency, right? Because it gives you like, if I can, and I've thought about this for years, right? I used to have one of the old Zeo devices where you'd strap it onto your forehead, and my wife told me it looked sexy, but you know, she's sitting next to me, so I think it was a lie. But because I thought, I'm like, oh man, if I could get my sleep efficiency up to like, you know, 95, 99%, I can then condense maybe 8 hours into like 6 hours, and I'll have like 2 extra hours. I'll have all the benefits. I'm still getting sleep. And as far as I can tell, it appears that that doesn't work, right? So having a high sleep efficiency is good, but trying to get, you know, 95%, usually when I see that, that means someone has been very sleep deprived, right? Your body is trying to quote unquote catch up on different things, right? So I was going to do an Instagram post, and maybe I'll still do it. How to hack your Aura score and make it look like you're a sleep person, right? So all you do is like stay up kind of late the night before, like get some good movement in, just like exhaust yourself out, and then go to bed at an early hour, and then wake up at a good time. And what you'll see is because of the kind of the makeup quality of it and the movement and everything else, all your scores will go up. Like your deep sleep will go up, your REM sleep will go up, like your sleep efficiency will go up. And then you take the picture of that and you like stick it on Instagram. So, but you don't want to get 100% sleep efficiency. That usually means someone's sleep deprived. So when I look at their Aura scores, which I do on my online clients, if I see like really, really out of the ordinary high scores, I'll look at the previous 2 nights. If they're really low, I'm like, that's kind of what's going on there. So,
because there's a difference between like passing out and like catching up on that the sleep debt, right? And then actually getting sleep, which is like accruing rest.
yeah, they're very different, right? So if you think about the body survival orientated, sleep's relatively high at the top of the list. It would kind of make sense that we're trying to quote unquote make up for lost sleep. It's a very big debate if we ever can or not. But we do see acute changes in deep sleep. You'll have a little bit more deep sleep. You'll have a little bit more REM. Is it as much as if you had a good night's sleep the night before? Doesn't appear to be. But if sleep is so high in the survival scale, it makes sense that we would try to do things to try to recapture those and try to get back to our homeostatic baseline as soon as possible. So again, I'm pounding the survival thing a lot, but I always wonder then, what is the record for like no sleep? And is that really a real thing? Should we even be worried about it? And it turns out there was a no sleep record done by a guy named Randy Gardner. Was scientifically documented. You can pull up the references there. He was the longest human to have intentionally gone without sleep. And he did not use any stimulants of any kind. And in 1964, he stayed awake for 11 days and 25 minutes. As far as I can tell, in terms of documented people staying awake, that was the longest one I could find. There's a bunch of other highly theoretical stuff. This was a world record by Guinness, and then it was later outlawed because it was way too dangerous.
Jesus.
So we'll probably never see this one broken again, nor would I recommend anyone even try, because that's a long period of time. And what was super cool is that they had like all of it documented too, right? So usually we teach sleep management courses. That's what most people look like during this, so hopefully no one's asleep yet. So this is fascinating to me. So day 2, right? So this is on day 2. Difficult focusing the eyes or signs of atrogenesis, which is basically difficulty recognizing objects, right? So you can recognize them, but only by touch. So your visual system is already kind of checking out, and you're kind of using proprioception to kind of make up for it. That's like day 2, right? That's not even day 1.
Yeah.
Moodiness, some signs of what's called ataxia, which is just an inability to repeat simple tongue twisters. Right? So your tongue is controlled by a motor movement, right? And actually has a lot of very, very fine-scale movement in order for us to talk and do things like that. So that kind of goes out the window by day 3 already. So day 4, irritability, uncooperative attitude, memory lapses, and difficult concentrating. He had his first hallucination, was that a street sign was a person, followed by a delusional episode in which he imagined that he was a famous black football player. And if I remember right, I think this guy was a DJ, and so I think it was an on-air kind of DJ type stunt, and I think that's why it was so well recorded. So that's like day 4, right? And you remember, like, he goes on for like 11 days.
Yeah.
So day 5, he's starting to have more hallucinations. He's seeing a path extending down a room in front of him through a quiet forest. These are sometimes described as hypnagogic reveres. Greener recognized it for a while that these were completely illusionary in nature. But now he's like starting to not be able to tell what's real or what's a hallucination, right? And that's not good. So day 6, speech is very slow. It has difficulty naming just common objects. I'm like, oh man. So day 7 goes on, irritability, slurring speech, memory lapses. Day 9, episodes of fragmented thinking, frequently beginning but not finishing sentences. So day 10, he's paranoid, focused on a radio show host who Gardner felt was trying to make him appear foolish because he was having difficulty remembering some details about this. And then by day 11, the completely expressionless appearance, speech slurred without intonation, had to be encouraged to talk or to get him to respond at all. His attention span was very short and his mental abilities were diminished. And that was the end of that. So,
Jesus.
Yeah, so pretty bad. And it was interesting about it too is that it wasn't just this nice steep linear decline. Like it drops off hard, like starting at the beginning, and then just keeps getting worse and worse and worse after that. So
What's
again,
amazing is it's so quick. Like so day 2, you're feeling like pretty significant.
Yeah.
Lapses.
Yeah, and if people think about it, if they've ever done the old college all-nighter, which unfortunately I have probably a few too many times in my past, it's a weird thing because like you kind of get through it, and in the morning you're like, that wasn't that bad, But part of that is because your perception of how sleep deprived you are, like crashes too. So I remember doing a one night. I had like this thing for my PhD, doing my advisor, and I had even started working on it early, but I'm not a speedy technical writer at all. It's just horrendously slow. So I ended up inadvertently staying up all night to get it done. I had a meeting with him at 9 in the morning. In hindsight, I drove down to his office, which I probably shouldn't have done. But I felt all right in the morning, handed in, and I'm like, well, I'll be all right. I'll stay up most of the day. Because I was afraid if I went to bed, I'd never wake up again. And I had an event that I went to, and I remember getting into the event, and they put it in, it was a dark arena. I was actually watching Seth Godin speak. And I had like 2 cups of coffee, and I love Seth Godin stuff. And I was all excited for this. And they turned the lights down, and I remember myself just sitting there, like just starting to nod off. I'm like, oh, this isn't good. So, yeah, happens relatively fast.
Yeah.
So in day 11, they did a series of what's called sevens tests, where they start with the number 100 and proceed backwards by 7. He got to 65 and only 5 subtractions and then stopped. And they asked him, I said, why did you stop? He said he claimed that he couldn't remember what he was supposed to be doing. So literally within like a few seconds, like no idea what's going on, no idea where he's at, like no idea at all. Yeah, so I thought that was pretty profound. That's like kind of scary, actually.
Well, and I know you're going to probably talk on this, but it's like, 11 intentional days of not going to sleep. But, we constantly live in a world of lack of sleep. So,
yeah, and we'll talk about like what, what is normal? Like, how would you even know what normal is supposed to be?
Yeah.
So even in 2017, Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine was awarded to 3 of the principal scientists who contributed to the discovery of the network of genes and proteins regulating the circadian rhythms based on the light-dark 24-hour cycle. So this is 2017, so it's not really that old. Yeah, you can argue Nobel Prizes are a little bit, behind in a few years because of the process and stuff. But it wasn't like this is like, 2001 or 1994. A lot of this is still relatively new-ish. And just in terms of general sleep costs, evidence now that many major disasters have been due to sleep debt related. So people probably remember the oil spill, the Exxon Valdez, guy fell asleep. Nuclear accidents at Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island. There's some stuff about even the loss of the Space Shuttle Challenger, that those were all related to sleep debt related effects. So in terms of cost, even just in things we can measure, it's pretty high. So this is 1995. 100,000 sleep-related traffic accidents. I think it's higher now, but I couldn't find a peer-reviewed source for it. I claim about 1,500 American lives each year, so it's pretty high. Commission on Sleep Disorders, like sleep-related accidents and sleep disorders impact productivity and cost the American economy between 100 to 150 billion dollars each year, and this is from 1995 and 1996.
Oof.
So it is worse now than what it was then. And I couldn't find an updated number that put it into actual economic terms, but it's definitely not better. It's probably quite a bit worse than that.
And that's pretty big numbers given, I mean, that's 15 years ago. It really isn't that long ago.
No.
And that's huge.
Yeah. And one of the problems with this is among the common consequences of large sleep debt are attentional lapses, reduced short-term memory capacity, or impaired judgment and occurrence of what's called microsleeps. So I know Dr. Matthew Walker has talked about this too. And he's made the comparison that, obviously driving while you're intoxicated, a very bad thing. No one should do it. But he said driving under high sleep impairment is almost worse because when you go to sleep, like you're out. Like you are completely, literally not at the wheel at all whatsoever for that period of time. The only benefit is, luckily, it's a very short period of time. But just think about it. You're in an extremely moving fast 60 to 80 mile an hour tin can. Even if it's a very small period of time, some really, really bad things can happen. It's not like you're sitting at your desk where your head may hit your keyboard or something. So one of the first times I remember this, we went to see, is in 1993, I went to see a band called Consolidated at First Avenue. And I was up doing college, just started at St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota. So I drove down to the Twin Cities. Two other good friends of mine drove up from Mankato, so about an hour and a half away. It was kind of a late show. And so I talked to him the next day and I said, hey, how did you get back home? I assume you got back home okay. And my friend Mark's like, yeah, we made it back okay, but Craig slept more than I did, and that bastard was driving. I was like, uh-oh, that's not good. So we had to keep swatting him to keep him awake, which, in hindsight is a horrible idea. I should have done that. I'm pretty sure our friend Craig probably has some form of narcolepsy because previous to this, he had fallen asleep and destroyed 3 mailboxes with 3 different cars. So yeah, not even from drinking, just falling asleep. And luckily it was only mailboxes he hit, but
right. Shit.
Yeah. It could have been a lot worse than that. So one of the questions is, well, how much sleep do we get? Right. I guess koalas just sleep a lot. I couldn't find an actual number on koala sleep, but a buddy of mine in Australia told me that they look really cute, but they're actually anger, little bitter, smelly animals, I guess. So not a koala expert. So some very cool studies they did in the Arctic Circle, right? So they have periods where they have 24 hours of daylight, and they've got periods where they obviously have the opposite. Because you're removing all those kind of tracking things related to the sun, it makes for some cool experiments. And there's really only nerdy scientists that are hanging out there anyway. So they took all their watches, clocks, and other timekeeping devices were removed. Only the station's computers that the subjects did not see tracked the time that the team went to sleep and were awake.
Wow.
Individuals were allowed to do their work, but they were allowed to just choose when they should sleep or wake up according to their quote-unquote body time. So what they tried to do is say, hey, you can sleep as much as you want, stay awake, do whatever you want, but we're going to remove all other cues of, watches, any other thing we use to maybe try to push ourselves a little bit too far or adjust our circadian rhythm in any way. What they found was that the result is that overall sleep in time was 10.3 hours. Every member of the team showed an increase in sleep time. The shortest sleep was 8.8 hours a day, and the longest was literally almost 12 hours a day.
Whoa.
So it's much longer than what I think most people would realize. Now, again, with that, you could argue that, part of that is making up for sleep loss and sleep debt and things of that nature. But another study showed that the biological need for sleep may be closer to 10 hours per day. This is actually typical of monkeys and apes living in the wild, and the 7 to 7.5 hours typical of humans. I like this. In today's high-tech clock-driven society, 1995. And it was like you would read this and you go, oh my God, this must have been published last year. It's like, no, like we've known about some of this stuff for a long time, right? So I was like, wow, that's interesting. So another study, right? So looking at, are we chronically sleep deprived? I have this weird fascination where I look at a topic and then I figure out what is the earliest I can find research on it. And this was 1975.
Whoa.
Right? Because a lot of times we think, oh my God, all this sleep stuff, it's all sexy now, and all this new data, and there is a lot more data than we've ever had before. But we've known that humans are probably sleep deprived for a long time. So it took 16 young adult male subjects. The first 3 nights went to bed at 11 p.m. and got up at 7 a.m. What they're trying to do is trying to get them on a normal sleep cycle a little bit, trying to make sure that they don't go into the study just chronically sleep deprived. So on the 4th night, bed at 11 p.m., they were allowed to sleep in. What's called make-up sleep, or ad libitum sleep is a technical term, resulted in an extra 126 minutes more sleep than was found on the 3rd night of controlled sleep. The results suggest the hypothesis that we're living in a contemporary society that promotes a state of chronic sleep deprivation in humans. So this is after they had 3 nights of 8 hours of sleep. Again, you could argue maybe they didn't sleep all that well. Maybe we're drastically changing their sleep. But some data to show that maybe we need more sleep than what we have imagined. And what I've noticed with some clients is I'm like, hey, if you're going on vacation, ideally go to bed early, which I know that sucks. You're on vacation. I get it, whatever. But if you can, go to bed early and then just sleep as long as you possibly can in the morning. Yes, I know that's not the best for your circadian rhythm, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's more or less just an awareness drill to see how long they actually sleep. I've had multiple clients come back and be like, oh man, dude, I was sleeping for like 10 to 11 hours for like 3 to 5 nights in a row.
Whoa.
Right? And these are people who previously told me that, oh, I only need 6 hours and I'm fine. I think even as an awareness drill, it's super useful. Obviously, did an interview with my buddy, Dr. Ben House. If you ever get down to his place in Costa Rica, it's literally in the middle of the jungle, which is amazing. And they did a really good job with, there's lights there at night, but they're not like overpowering. And because they're kind of secluded, when it gets dark, it's friggin' dark. And because they're so close to the equator, I think the time only changes by plus or minus 15 minutes over the entire year.
Whoa.
Right? So it's always dark at the same time, always light at around the same time. And it's amazing to be down there for like, the first couple of days, everyone's like, we're staying up late. Yeah. By like day 2, it's like 8 o'clock. They're like, bro, I'm going to bed. And plus, you're training and learning and all that kind of stuff too. So it's, just to have, and even the first time I went down there, I was not aware of how much external light, even stuff you can control, like big cities, like street lights and other things like that you're exposed to, they will kind of push your circadian rhythm a little bit later.
I just started wearing a sleep mask, and it's actually made a huge difference in my sleep. And I was like, and I had no idea that it would. Like, just didn't think it would even notice. I would notice, but holy crap, huge difference.
Yeah, so I carry one when I travel a lot. Another travel tip is the usually nicer-ish hotels have more blackout curtains, which is good. But there's always that stupid gap in the middle of the curtain in the morning. So take like the closet thing that you use to clip on the pants that you're supposed to bring down to the person, whoever, to wash them or whatever. Take that and like stick it on the curtain so you pull them tight so it doesn't wake you up in the morning.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, that works pretty good. And I carry a sleep mask too. The quick part on this is we're not going to go super heavy into sleep regulation, but there's 2 what they call systems of the body. There's the awake network and there's a sleep pressure network. And ideally what you want is a high amount of drive from the awake network, right? So people think about coffee, right? So the awake network is probably driven mostly by adenosine. So coffee, caffeine modifies the adenosine receptors to make you kind of feel more awake. And then you've got sleep pressure. So sleep pressure actually goes up during the day and peaks later in the day. But because the drive from the awake network is also super high at that time, people feel like they're more awake. What happens as it gets towards evening, the awake drive goes away. So it gets pulled back, and so now you're left with this massive amount of sleep pressure, which in theory should force you to go to bed and should have you sleep all the way through the night. What happens is So you can imagine that gets all screwy in a lot of humans. And here's a study is just looking at the different ways of sleep. And also on a side note, I was fascinated by, like, do dreams actually mean anything? And I don't know. That's the answer. I can't. I just find it fascinating because, like, I mean, you go back in time, right? So different movies and, you know, like Philip K. Dick's original, you know, sci-fi novels and stuff. And there's even some stuff called lucid dreaming, which is actually some okay science on, like, trying to control your dreams. So I did that for a while, and it's pretty fascinating. It's a monster pain in the butt to get to the point where you can actually do it, and it kind of takes a lot of effort even during the day. Because one of the big things is you don't know when you're asleep or when you're dreaming. So there's different things you can do to try to check that. But I thought for a while, like, if I could practice lucid dreaming and I could get to the point where I could practice deadlifts while I was dreaming, would the enhanced motor formation because of dreaming, and I don't have any load on my system, allow me to do more deadlifts heavier? That was my hypothesis, but I don't know. I never really got to the point where I could do lucid dreaming, but I couldn't get to the point where I could all of a sudden magically have a deadlift bar up here. So
I need to do an interview with, like, Steph and Jody. Like, what's it like living with a brainy researcher? Of, like, what's the shit that comes out of their head? Like, you know, it'd be fun to try.
Oh yeah, yeah. Jody's probably laughing because the thing I have now in our garage we just got, or we ordered it, I pick it up when I go home, is basically a 15.6 cubic feet freezer, so I can sit in there and do cold water immersion and measure stuff. So
Nice.
yeah, so that's fun. Which people laughed. It's like, don't you live in Minnesota? It's like, yeah.
Just put a bathtub outside.
Pretty much. The problem is it freezes solid, so that's the downside. So the whole point of this slide is that there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on, right? So everyone's like, oh, it's just the SCN. But the SCN has effects on the HPA axis, your adrenals, glucocorticoids, immune cells. It affects the autonomic nervous system, right? So if you get fancy and start measuring stuff with heart rate variability, you can see different effects on sleep directly. As we know, light will affect this massively. This does this by what's called retinal ganglion cells. These little cells that are in the back of the eye that just literally detect photons and light. And again, melatonin has an effect. That's kind of the hormone that's one of the master regulators of that. Melatonin also has effect on immune cells. There's also inputs from peripheral clocks, right? So it's not all just the SCN. There's some interesting stuff with jet lag. You travel, like when I went over to Japan a couple of years ago, man, that's some brutal jet lag to kind of get over. I would think that I'm probably better able to handle it now. But some fascinating stuff on that. And again, this is just showing the same thing, that all these are very tightly related. Even growth hormone production, prolactin, cortisol, immune function, how all that plays in is all highly regulated by sleep. Yeah, so can't wake up late if you never go to sleep. I heard that one before. One of my unfortunate experiences with sleep deprivation was, was it like 11 years ago now, I think? We did a thing called the Ram Race. So it's a race across America. And it's a bike ride, a race. I called it a bike ride, and all the guys who were riding used to yell at me all the time. Like, no, it's a race. I'm like, a race? Like, how do you race across the U.S.? Like, dude, you still got to ride as fast as you can. I'm like, all right, whatever. So it was a group of, we're on a 4-person team. And it's literally, we started in San Diego, and we finished in Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Woof.
And it literally is a race. Like, everyone starts at the same time. And you have the group we were in had 4 riders. So what we would do is we'd have 2 riders at a time would switch back and forth. So you'd have one guy go out, and he would just, cram as hard as he can, ride for 20 minutes, and then he would switch with another guy. He would go out, ride 20 minutes as hard as he can, half hour, and then they would switch. So they would switch back and forth on a 4 to 6 hour sort of shift. Those 2 guys would come off the course, and the next 2 guys would come out, and they would switch back and forth. So someone is riding at all hours of the day, night, whatever. Because if you're not riding, even at a slow pace, man, you're just massively losing time.
Yeah.
So being the engineering geek that I was, I did all the calculations and realized, oh wow, even if we just throw a guy out on the course just to ride slow, we're way better off than not moving at all.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not moving at all, you're just getting sunk. So we're doing this thing, and I was supposed to be doing nutrition and helping with that kind of stuff, but that turned into an absolute shit show because by day 3, no one wanted to do any of it. People would not get on the scale because hindsight, looking back now, I'm like, oh yeah, you're trying to modify a bunch of chronically exhausted, tired, sleep-deprived humans, right? It's like trying to manage like 3-year-olds, literally. And they're not doing it like intentionally. It's just like they have no prefrontal cortex function. They're just out, you know, you literally almost have to prop them up and stick them on a bike and point them where to go and stuff. But the downside is like all the staff people are, well, except for the 2 drivers who slept way more than they should, chronically sleep deprived. So I go into this thing and I have the first shift. So I'm doing this. All right, cool. Oh, we screwed up with the schedule. So you have to do the second shift also. Okay, great. So at this point now I've been up for 24 hours in a row. And then they're like, oh my God, this guy is like pissing maple syrup. What do we do? I'm like, and I looked at it and I went, oh my God, your urine is almost like black. Like, this is not good. So like start drinking fluids, jammed in a bunch of electrolytes. Literally like 10 minutes later, he's like, I'm like, what are you doing pissing already? It's only been like 5-10 minutes. So we do the same thing again. Like literally, like no fluid is staying in him at all. It's just going straight through. And I'm like, oh shit, his kidneys are not working. Oh crap. So get him in the car. I get to drive him an hour and a half off course to the ER, get him checked in. Luckily he didn't have, you know, the horrible rhabdomyolysis. He had a mild version. They stick like 2 bags of IVs in him. They're like, okay, you know, don't ride for the next 4 days. He's like, yeah, whatever. And so first time I slept in 36 hours, I passed out in the lounge area there, and I took a Kleenex box and stuck it on my head for a pillow. So fast forward through this, by the end of the 7 days, I had literally slept, I think 13 hours the entire week, which was horrible. So like by day 4, as we would drop people off, and then the other vehicle would go ahead so that when the fresh 2 guys who were quote unquote fresh would come out, we would know where they would go, and the car would follow them and we'd know how often to switch. So I'm like, okay, we'll switch in like 12 miles after the guy's ride. So I look at the speedometer, all right, 12 miles, got it. And you're just driving a car following a guy riding a bike only 20 miles an hour, right? It's nothing too exciting. And I could not remember a number after day 3 if my life depended upon it. Like, what was that? 12 miles, what is that on the odometer? I have no idea. So I had to keep a pen and paper and like write everything down. So we get all the way to the end, and 3,000 miles, 7 days. We actually got, let's see, 3rd place. Like the 2 teams in front of us were professional riders. So most people are averaging like 3 hours of sleep per day if you're lucky.
Whoa.
And this is what happened to our bikes. So at the very end, we get to the award ceremony. We're done. We cross the finish line. All we have to do is take the vehicle and put it into a parking garage. And I told the guy I was with, I'm like, dude, I can't drive. Like, I feel like I am beyond drunk. There's no way I'm getting behind the wheel to drive. I'm worthless. Like, I'll just sit here. We'll leave the car. I don't even care if the car gets towed. There's no way I'm driving right now. I know it's only 2 miles to go in the city to get there. I'll take a cab. I'll walk. I don't care. I can sleep right here for all I care. He's like, no, bro, I got it. I'm good. I'm like, are you sure that you're good? He's like, oh yeah, man, I'm good. So he gets in the car. We pull in, and all of a sudden we hear this crunch and the ripping of like sheet metal. And we're both like, what is that? We have no idea what's going on. And so we stop. We get out. We go, oh shit, the bikes. They're on the roof. And yeah, the rack had literally pulled the sheet metal screws through the roof of the minivan, and it was really bad. The worst part was it was one of the riders. It was his minivan that he had donated. Yep. Which he couldn't even sell it for money then, because you can imagine a bunch of sweaty cyclists passing out in the back. It smelled so bad. It's got rips in the sheet metal and the roof on it, and dents in the door when we hit shit. And yeah. So.
And thankfully the bikes were probably really cheap bikes too.
Yeah, they were. Luckily, the one guy actually had a time trials bike that back then was about $8,000. I know the ones now are even more expensive, but it was one of the very first carbon fiber ones, and that was his baby. And I was just happy that one wasn't on the roof, because I probably would have been killed. So
by him and Jody.
Yeah. So, I mean, the bikes were expensive, but yeah. And if you know anything about what happens to carbon fiber under high levels of fatigue, it doesn't bend, it shatters.
Oh.
So you just have to replace parts, which gets incredibly expensive. So what happens was if you don't sleep related to metabolism, right, that's probably what people are more interested in, like what happens with fat loss, right? Because that's what the question everybody wants to know for good reason. Very cool study, 2011. They stuck a bunch of humans in a chamber. And these are around 21% fat humans. So these are not like very large, obese people. They're actually, you know, pretty good. They're all healthy individuals. We locked them up in a chamber for 2 whole days. So as a metabolic chamber, they measure all the air that goes in, the air that goes out. They did a nice, what's cool, crossover design. So each person serves as their own control, which is a nice way of controlling variations and variability. So day 1, they were allowed to sleep normally. Just sleep as much as you want. We measured sleep by EEG. Sleep as much as you want. Day 2, we fragmented their sleep, which means that they're only allowed to sleep for 1 hour at a time. So same 8-hour block. They had this alarm clock that would beep incessantly. They had to wake up, hit a button on the alarm clock, and then they could go back to sleep. So most of the time, they don't even remember waking up, right? Same duration of sleep. What they found was, and this is just how they vary it, is if you want to know something about how researchers write stuff, like this is like what it actually says in the study. You know, approximately wake-up calls varied in frequency between 500 to 2,000 hertz with intensity between 400 to 110 decibels. Subjects had to confirm waking up by turning off their alarm within 2 minutes, right? So we translate that for you so you actually know what it means. I don't know why sloths freak me out. But I guess they sleep a lot. Nobody knows why. So what they found was when you fragmented their sleep, it had a direct impairment on fat oxidation. Right, so fat oxidation, literally how much fat are you burning for fuel? So in English, they burned less fat. And then the next question is, okay, well, how much less fat? So fat oxidation was estimated at 61 grams per day in the non-fragmented group, and then 29 grams per day in the fragmented group. So they literally cut in half. Now, if you extrapolate this to 1 month via an overly simplified caloric burn model that's linear, you know, and all that stuff, I know it's not really linear, but if you did and you held all other variables constant, that's about 2 pounds a month of fat gain or loss potentially. So it is something that if you make a bunch of assumptions, it kind of matters in the real world. It's not like a 2-gram difference per day. It's like, who gives a crap, right? You smell a Twinkie, you've already gained 2 grams of fat, so you don't worry about it. But it adds up to something that, you know, is actually substantial.
Yeah. And
again, this is for the same duration of sleep. This is not even cutting their duration of sleep. This is changing the quality of how much they slept.
Wow.
And when I first saw this study, I was like, yeah, you know, waking them up an hour, you know, every hour, that's kind of excessive. But then I look at some data from Aura and some other people who have had, you know, sleep studies and report that the doctor sends back with them. And it's not really that unrealistic. You know, if you have like sleep apnea, man, I've seen some reports from physicians from PSG and they're awake a lot, you know. So even without that, I've seen some Aura data that shows that, you know, it's potentially within the realm of possibility. So other metabolism stuff that changes. Another cool study they did. It's normal sleep. They were allowed sleep restriction, so 1 to 5:30 a.m. So normally about a good, nice 8 hours, or a little bit over, 7.5 under. And then we dramatically cut your sleep to about 4.5 hours. Again, these were in healthy men. And if we look at what's called free fatty acids here, so if we go back, remember this is the red is the sleep restricted group. So here's their times of sleep. What we see in the red is we see a little bit more free fatty acids coming out. And when they wake up, kind of appears to normalize a little bit. So I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I've done that before. So you know you're sleep deprived when you go to take a nap and you wake up like 4 hours later. Yeah, you're probably sleep deprived. Growth hormone, which is fascinating. So the sleep deprived group doesn't get near the amount of growth hormone spike. And it's this weird biphasic, weird type of delay too, right? Because their body probably goes, hey, we're supposed to get normal growth hormone here, but uh-oh, we're not asleep. And maybe we try to make up for it a little bit later here, but pretty big difference there. Now, again, we could argue, does that physiologically make any difference? That's kind of debatable. Growth hormone from exercise probably doesn't make a huge difference. But with sleep, the amount and the duration are much different than the amount we see from exercise too. Noradrenaline, right? So just think of it as adrenaline, right? Higher in the sleep deprivation group, which is what you would expect, right? Because they're awake. And we see this massive uptick here. And then even, which I thought was interesting, a little bit more during the day too, which is kind of fascinating. Cortisol, definitely different, right? So we see these weird spikes at different times. We see a weird spike here right before they try to go to bed. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, maybe this is why people who have a messed up sleep cycle, what you'll chronically hear them say is, oh man, like between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, I'm just worthless. And then I try to go to bed early at 10 and I'm like wide awake and I don't know why, right? Well, cortisol may have something to do with that too. So insulin area under the curve, what was cool is they did this at different meals. So in the sleep deprived group, the same meal, same breakfast, same lunch, same dinner, they showed that you needed a lot more insulin in order to cover the amount of carbohydrates. So if you're looking at this from a health perspective, you could make an argument that if you had very, very short sleep, maybe you want to do something a little bit different for breakfast. Maybe you want to modify that. You at least want to try to get some blood glucose measurements and see what's going on. So insulin sensitivity changed also. So what we see here is sleep restriction. They're very much less insulin sensitive. So not a good thing. So insulin sensitivity was actually worse. And then they had more free fatty acids floating around in their bloodstream. They actually had less use of these free fatty acids. That's from the previous study. So the body has this mixed match now. We're sticking out more free fatty acids, but we're not able to use them as fuel as effectively. So that's not going to be good. We also have a poor glucose use, right? So that's not going to be in our favor. And what happens is you become very metabolically inflexible. You have a very hard time using carbohydrates. You have a very hard time using fat, but your body is still trying to put out more free fatty acids, which can get in and gum up a whole bunch of other stuff. And again, this was in previously healthy people. These are not pathologies. These are previously healthy subjects.
Wow.
And this is from 4 nights of impaired sleep. So it wasn't like we sleep deprived them for a month or 2 weeks. It was literally within 4 nights. So that's not that long a period of time in the real world. I've looked at a fair amount of ORDA data and sleep data, and I'll see clients get 4 or 5 hours of sleep for sometimes weeks on end. So again,
I've had
not
times
that
I
unrealistic.
get like 6 hours of sleep for years.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and that's pretty common.
Cool.
Another study said partial sleep deprivation, only a single night, induces insulin resistance in multiple metabolic pathways, again, in healthy subjects. So literally after one very poor night of sleep, we're already starting to see metabolic changes that are not doing you any good. So what do we do about this? So what are some sleep actions? The goal is to increase the quality and quantity of sleep. I find increasing quality first, because otherwise, like any trainer who's had this conversation, and I'm sure you've had this multiple times, it literally goes the same way of, okay, give me your schedule. What do you do during the day? Okay, you get up. Yep, you got to drive. Got to get the kids ready. Go to work all day. Drive back home. Drive to the gym. Get your training in. Get home. Get the kids to bed. Play with them for a while. Okay, it's like 9 o'clock at night. You watch Netflix for 2 hours. Go to bed at 11. Get up at 5 the next day. And so the conversation then goes, oh, wait a minute. So I'm only sleeping from 11 till 5, assuming I fall asleep and wake up exactly at those times. That's 6 hours, probably less than that for sleep time. That's time in bed. Oh, and now you're telling me to go to bed at 9. So you're telling me I can't hang out with my spouse or girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, and watch Netflix for 2 hours. Screw you. I don't want to listen to you about sleep. That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what do you do? Like, okay, maybe you get a different job. Maybe you don't drive as far. Maybe you work from home. Maybe you don't train as much at the gym, right? you literally have to have a discussion about the values of what they do with their life, right? And expecting that someone's going to dramatically change those on a dime is just completely unrealistic expectation, right? So if you can increase the quality of sleep, the least you're saying, okay, those 6 hours, just get as high quality of sleep as you can there. Maybe we'll worry about trying to get more sleep at a different point in time. So what I like to do with that at first is get as much sleep as you can in the morning, in terms of, not sleep I should say, but sunlight exposure. So why not sleep more? Again, very hard to do. And the other part is that people, their circadian rhythm, like I mentioned, gets so screwed, they're not tired at night. They're like, okay, now you're telling me to go to bed at 10, but I'm not tired at 10. I was tired between 2 and 4 in the afternoon and drank 4 cups of coffee, and then I was okay. So I know stuff you have in your program here, like literally take an AM walk, 10 to 20 minutes. I mean, even if you could get 5 minutes, that's fine. Ideally, no sunglasses. People are like, what? You want me to get sun blindness? So, like cancer in my eyeballs? I'm like, no, don't go out and like stare at the sun all day, idiot. Just go walk. Like the sunlight is over your head. It's normally in the morning, so it's going to be at much more of an oblique angle. You don't have to stare at it. But what we want is, like we mentioned, those photons to hit the back of the eyeball and then to help re-regulate that circadian rhythm. Because we found that sunlight exposure is probably the most powerful thing to re-regulate circadian rhythm. Right? So a lot of the jet lag, hacks and tips are get sunlight as soon as you can. The other part is you're getting some movement. Ideally, I like people to do this walk fasted. Yeah, you get a little bit more use of fat as fuel, other things, but it's also just simple, right? Because otherwise you get a flood of questions. Oh, you want me to train in the morning? What do I do before I train? It's fasted. Don't worry about it. Oh, but what about my warm-up? Like, don't I need my protein and carbohydrate shake? No, it's fasted. Just go train. Oh, but it's like, no, for walking, just put your shoes on, walk out your door. Yeah. What do I do to warm up? Like, you don't need to warm up to go walk, right? If you need to warm up to walk, you've got other issues you need to figure out. Don't wear sunglasses. And then also, if you wear contacts, some of the new contacts actually have lenses that will block UV light. Mm-hmm. Now, we can argue later if that's a good thing overall or not, but I would say don't put your contacts in, right? Don't wander into traffic, right? You're probably not driving your car, so even if you're blind as a bat like I was before I had LASIK, you're probably going to be okay, but again, within reason. And again, it's easy to do. So what I like is you're overlapping a lot of habits that make it easier to do. You also get eye movement, right? So we're doing this obviously on a computer. So our eyes, the little muscles around our eyes are getting tuned to focus on that particular length. When you go outside, you get a lot more peripheral, and I tell people to look farther ahead in the distance. I do this little thing where I tell clients to look at the tops of trees and then see where one tree ends and the next one starts, right? You're not trying to, figure out what tree is what. I don't care. It's like, can your eyes even perceive like little differences that you're not used to looking at? Number 2, track what time you go to bed and get up. And they're like, oh, but why not time I'm asleep? Because that's not really that actionable. I got this from Dan Party, right? The thing you can control is when you go to bed and when you get up. It's much harder to control how well you sleep. That's usually based on other habits you do during the day. 8 to 10 hours would be ideal, but whatever you can do is better, right? At low end, I'll even take 7.5. But if you get to bed earlier, odds are you're going to be able to get more sleep. Most people can't change the time that they get up in the morning. The other thing you can do is set an alarm clock in the evening. Maybe you need an hour to wind down, so maybe set it for 8. You have an hour to wind down, you're in bed by 9 then, right? So you're trying to get into bed earlier to build the habit on that. Last tip I got here is make it a sleep cave, right? This is probably not new to anybody else. Cool, dark, little to no electronics, low blue lights, right? You can get these kind of orange, amber colored lights, yellow or even red. We call them mole glasses, right? We wrote a book called Mr. Mole Goes to Sleep, which is a children's book for adults all about sleep. And so those work pretty good. I've tried some of the red ones, and some of them are so dark, like I don't even know how anyone gets anything done. Like you almost literally can't see anything out of them. Like, oh, but they block all the blue light. Like, true, but they block so much I can't really see anything either. So again, I think just, within reason, do what is useful. People have programs like Flux and Iris and things they can install on their computer. We're just trying to get that stimulatory blue light down as much as we can. What I have found is it's interesting if people get a lot of solid light exposure during the day. I've noticed people can kind of screw this up at night, and anecdotally doesn't seem to have as big of an impact. I think it still probably has an impact, but I find it's not quite as bad. So in summary, that's my sister's corgi picture, so I had to put a corgi picture in there. Sleep is important. It's harder to make changes because you're dealing mostly with the psychology side of it. Impaired sleep loss makes you very metabolically inflexible. Poor fat loss, or poor use of fat also, poor carbohydrate use, impaired growth hormone release. We didn't talk about caffeine. I have those in backup slides if people want them. Most people probably need to stop caffeine a little bit earlier than what they normally do. There's a high amount of genetic variability with caffeine effects. You probably don't need a 23andMe test to look at your CYPA, blah, 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 enzymes and stuff. If you have coffee in the afternoon and you can't sleep, try not having coffee in the afternoon and see what happens, right? Don't need to get too crazy. Biggest thing is actually like go to bed. Because like people sometimes get so tied up on one of the latest and greatest sleep hack and they forget that maybe I should just like go to bed and I'll get more sleep. So last thing, if people want more information, they can just go to miketnelson.com/Sam, S-A-M, lowercase or uppercase is fine. I'll send you all the slide decks. Plus I'll include a couple more sleep actions for you. I'll throw in some beneficial caffeine information to you also. And yeah, so just miketnelson.com/Sam. Awesome. Any questions from you, sir?
That was amazing. That was such great information. And I'm really deep into my sleep journey right now. Like I just bought a chili pad.
I love those things.
Oh my God, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I just bought the sleep mask. Switching in my living room, I switched to using from overhead lighting. I'm just using candles at night.
Yeah.
I moved my couch further away from the TV and I wear blue blocking glasses. And I mean, just going to bed is huge.
Yeah.
One thing, can you maybe talk on is, like we're sitting on the couch and like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. I'm just so tired. And then I get up to go to bed and I am like, I can't sleep. What's going on? What's happening there? Because I think that happens for so many people.
Yeah. So the biggest thing, the first question I'll ask then is, typically when you've gone to bed in the past, have you had a hard time sleeping? And if people go, yes, and I'm going, okay, so that was sleeping in your bed. They're like, yes. Your brain can kind of neurologically get reassociated that your bed isn't a place for sleep, right? So if people have like kind of weird insomnia and they just lay there and like, oh my God, I can't sleep. I'm like, maybe you should get up and go read somewhere under low light. Because the longer you lay there, like getting really worried about it, now you're reassociating that when I go to bed and I get in this environment, oh, I don't sleep, right? So I tell people, like, in general, just make your bed only for sleep. If you have a hard time not being able to sleep, just figure out some rough time, 10 or 15 minutes, 20 minutes. If I'm not asleep by then, I'll get up and go somewhere else or sit in a chair and read very low light, something that's not really that stimulating. If they want a copy of my master's thesis about zapping monkeys, I'll send that to them. It'll put you out probably within 30 seconds. It's pretty freaking boring. So something like that. That'd be the first question I would ask. Second thing is obviously environment, which you're probably doing pretty good. The other part is try to have the minimal amount of things that you have to do and then keep the lights as low as possible, right? So a lot of people are like, well, I just got up from the couch. But yeah, then I had to brush my teeth, and then I had to do this, and then I had to do that, and then I had 800 other things I had to do in the morning, so I had to write my list for that. So try to have the minimal amount of things to do. And then even like having some type of rituals I think is beneficial. Like I'll try to have a little list of stuff I want to do in the morning. I'll have that already written out and stuff. So by the time I go to bed, I'm like, I get up in the morning, I know I'll see it, I know it'll be there, what time my calls are, that kind of thing. So I think even some of those little things like that can be a benefit.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it too, is the ritual of putting yourself in an environment to be successful. And I really like that you touched on the whole, like, waking up earlier is not really an option for a lot of people, like psychologically. Yeah. Right. Like you'd like to think like, because a lot of people aspire, they want to be that person that wakes up at 4 a.m. I go running and I love it. And I'm just like that type A person. And then they get down on themselves because they don't think they can find the time in life to go do those things because they can't be the morning person, and that's realistically the only time they feel like they can do those activities. And I love that the real emphasis was like, all right, let's set up our room to be a little bit more inviting for sleep, and like let's just work on the quality. Like you can't change always the amount you get, so let's like, you know, block out the light, or you know, just get the electronics away. I removed an alarm clock from my room.
Yep.
And I just put one of those Alexa things in my room, so it's like I just set an alarm with that if I have to use it. But like, there's no like waking up being like, okay, I can only get 4 more hours of sleep or 3 more hours of sleep, and that's usually helped me. And you know, just being able to set that like that tone of like get up and go to bed, right? And like it helped a ton. And you find it for yourself.
The morning thing too, like I'm probably more of a morning person now on purpose. And that has probably taken me, if I'm honest, probably 4 years. You know, so it was about 4.5 years ago, I left working for a medical device company. So I didn't have to work anywhere. So I've been doing my own business full time. My wife works for me. So in theory, I can control whatever schedule I want. You know, if I don't want to talk to clients in the morning, I just don't schedule them in the morning. And even doing that, like up until, it's probably been about 6 months ago now, I'm pretty good about having a morning routine. I'll do some light exercise and things like that in the morning. But if I'm 100% honest, it's probably taken me almost like 4 years to get to that point. And I'm someone who I can literally move my schedule around to however I want. You know, travel makes it a little bit tricky. So even then, it's like unrealistic if someone has the ability to change everything that they're going to be able to do that, right? Because I would still want to stay up later. I would spend too much time working late. And then I would want to sleep in the next morning, and then that day's kind of mixed up. And then I did better at getting up in the morning, but oh my God, like I've never exercised in the morning. So even just doing light cardio stuff was just, horrible. So I go, okay, can I do a walk, right? And then, okay, I'm not making it to the gym in the morning. Maybe I should buy a rower and stick it in my garage. Okay. So now it's really hard to talk myself out of even doing like 6 minutes, right? So I started literally doing 3 minutes. And I have a rower in my garage, right? You know, but I know enough to know that I'm just going to make it so easy, it's hard to talk myself out of it.
Yeah.
Right? So taking those very, very small steps, which at the time don't seem like they're going to add up to much. But I'm like, hey, if I do 8 minutes in the morning, right? Let's say I'm going to do 8 minutes in the morning. That's about 2,000 meters. Let's say I do that 5 days a week. So times 5, that's an extra like 10,000 meters I've rode. So it'd be like doing 2 5Ks a week extra. You know, so those little things that you do add up. I think just focusing on just showing up, like Atomic Habits is a great book for that. Just showing up on doing it, and you give yourself the credit for a while of just doing the thing. Yeah. Right. So the running joke my wife and I have is like, oh, I did the thing. Not so much what was the outcome of it, because at some point the outcome does matter, of course. But if you didn't do it, there's nothing. Right. So if you did something, you're probably getting closer to that, even if that's just the habit of doing it and then worrying about, you know, outcome and performance and that nature.
Absolutely amazing. And man, I'm really hoping people pick up Atomic Habits. That's a book I've got on the list for people.
Oh, it's awesome.
It's an amazing book. I would love to get James Clear to do a webinar like this on habits.
Yes. He's a good dude.
We'll see if we can get him to do that. So Dr. Mike, thank you so much for dropping some amazing knowledge and giving us great insight on sleep and recovery and metabolic flexibility and how all these small things really add up to big wins in our lifestyle choices. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Bye, guys. Dude, that was awesome.
Cool. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it.